Hello everyone, this is Neha Pellegrino, Senior MSP Compliance Counsel, and I wanted to take a moment to welcome you to the ECS on MSP podcast. As you all know, ECS is dedicated to assisting you navigate all the complexities of MSP compliance, but we believe that compliance shouldn't be static. The rules evolve, technology evolves, and the way people consume information evolves, which is what led us here. While we've been continuing to connect with you through our monthly webinars, which we love providing, we recognize that this industry moves really fast, and so do the professionals working in it. So the idea behind the podcast is about meeting you where you are by delivering content in a way that fits your schedule. And we're really excited to have this be a part of our ongoing commitment to share knowledge and support you. Each episode will bring you practical insights and real-world discussions, all in a format that's easy to listen to and easy to learn from, almost like you're sitting on the couch in our office. So whether you're here to stay compliant, deepen your understanding, or just hear from the voices that live and breathe this work every day, you're in the right place. That being said, let's get started.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's ECS National Webinar. We hope that you've all had a wonderful day so far, and we're so glad that you joined us today for the last webinar of the year, your Medicare Year in Review. I'm Adriana Carner, Marketing Manager here at ExamWorks Compliance Solutions, and I'll be your MC today. First of all, I just want to thank you all for taking the time to be here with us today. A little bit more information about our webinar series. For those of you who are regular participants, you may know that we do this at least once a month, and it's a great way to connect and communicate with our friends and clients across the country. So we're very excited to be back and presenting for you all today. And before we jump in, just a few housekeeping notes. Feel free to submit your questions anytime using the Q&A function. We will have some time for Q&A at the end. And if we do not get to your question, we will follow up via email after this webinar. And yes, the session is being recorded. We'll share the recording and a one-pager summary with you no later than end of day tomorrow, along with a link to last month's webinar as well. And we have a full cast of our webinar stars today, starting with Marty Casavoy, Senior Vice President of Compliance and Business Development, Neha Pellegrino, Senior MSP Compliance Counsel, Patty Strang, Senior MSP Compliance Counsel, Scott Huber, SVP of Technology, Michael Flower, Senior MSP Compliance Counsel, and last but not least, Lou Perazzo, the Vice President of National Accounts. And with that, I will turn it over to Neha to run through today's agenda.
Great, thanks, Adriana. I'm just going to take us through today's rundown. We're starting with some breaking news, hot off the press, and then we'll go through the top 10 list in Medicare compliance for 2025 as we round out what was a pretty eventful year. We'll also take a look ahead and discuss what's in store for 2026. And lastly, we'll wrap things up with any questions that arise from all of you listening as you take in today's discussion. So to kick things off here, I'm going to have Marty unveil some breaking news within the industry.
Thanks, Neha. And thanks everybody. Last webinar of the year, and certainly it's been an eventful one for CMS. So there were several announcements that came out from CMS over the last few weeks that coincided with the end of the government shutdown. And the first was really a new user guide, new NGHP Section 111 user guide, which came out really right at the end of right after the government shutdown ended. It's dated actually in October, believe it or not. It's like October 6th is the date that it was supposed to come out. It didn't come out till late November, but there were some updates, and we'll get to some of the details in a minute, but the core updates are that they've unveiled what Medicare would describe as clarifications around single settlements involving multiple dates of loss. So a single settlement with a single individual, one individual, where multiple dates of loss are being resolved all at once. Multiple settlements involving the same individual. So similar situation, but in reverse, right? You've got one individual settling with a multiple defendants for one event that occurred. New reporting rules around Medicare set-asides, or I should say policies. They're not regulations, they're not really rules. There are third-party recovery agent requirements, which I'll talk about right here, and just say that starting in April of 2026, if you have a third-party recovery agent like ECS, we are a third-party recovery agent for many of our clients, we will have to provide our EIN effective April of 2026 whenever we send in information that includes third-party recovery agent capabilities. And then there were some changes to the unsolicited response file, which I don't know how many of you are familiar with that, sort of an inside baseball thing when it comes to Section 111 reporting. If you know it, then you know it. If you don't, you don't. But basically, CMS has put some codes around certain responses that may be received via the unsolicited response file. So those are the big user guide updates. We're going to get to the detail around the first couple in a minute. But the other thing that coincided right at the end of the government shutdown was that CMS also announced via a memo that they would be providing WCMSA coding, so work comp Medicare set aside coding to Part D plans who would allow them to then deny coverage at point of sale for certain prescriptions when a person goes to try to fill a prescription. So if you think about a work comp claimant, if Medicare is going to be receiving or providing rather the NDC codes for those specific prescription drugs for MSAs that were approved by Medicare to Part D plans, and then the Part D plans may, if they so choose, elect to deny at point of sale a fill for that specific NDC number when the person has a work comp Medicare set aside. So think about it like this. If Marty Castavoy goes into Walgreens in March and there was a Medicare set aside that was approved last year that the Part D plan knows about because of the NDC number, they can actually deny the reimbursement at that point and say, hey, Marty, you need to go back and utilize your Medicare set aside. It shouldn't be the Part D plan that's paying for this. So that's coming in February. We're putting together kind of like a long form article on this. It's a very fascinating and complicated topic, and it's not something that you can just write breaking news about, but this is a big deal. We're going to focus on it quite a bit over the course of the next month. And then the last thing is CMS is going to be also unveiling a CMP webinar, Civil Money Penalties webinar, in January of next year, or January next month, I guess, January 15th. So be on the lookout for that. They haven't announced any other changes or any other webinars. They did cancel a webinar that was going to focus on the WCMSA reporting for October. They haven't re-announced when that will take place, but we're, obviously certainly looking forward to that announcement as well. So that's the breaking news. Now we're going to go into some detail on the next slide as we get to single settlements resolving multiple dates of loss. So when we look at this particular issue, this is the first one, and I'm going to have Lou kind of give some of the detail here in a second. But this is the first one where really there was a quote clarification from CMS, and that's how they would describe it. So basically what CMS is saying is when you have multiple incidents that are all being resolved with one single TPOC, then what CMS says is, quote, the RRE shall report the earliest date of incident, include all diagnoses codes settled for all dates of incident in that particular at that particular date of incident and at that particular TPOC. And it doesn't matter what happened on the subsequent dates of incident. It doesn't matter if the first date of incident was a medical only claim. It could have been a simple laceration that got resolved, and the subsequent date of accident was, the person got T-boned and they suffered a significant injury. Didn't matter. CMS is saying the first date of incident is the one that everything gets reported under. So, Lou, obviously this happens quite a bit in a lot of different jurisdictions. When we think about this right off the bat, this brings to mind states like New York and California where these types of settlements are common. So what's the impact of this clarification in those states and potentially others where multiple claims are resolved with one single settlement?
Yeah, we're happy that Medicare went forward and gave us clarification on this, or started the clarification on this. I should say, it's a nice step in the right direction, because for years we've been seeing RREs put things under multiple settlements, and to Medicare would look like there was more that was out there rather than what actually was out there. So for single settlements with multiple incidents, whether it is a med only followed by a lost time claim, followed by a major injury claim, if you are settling all of those claims at once, what Medicare wants you to do is use the earliest date of injury as the TPOC date. So we have an example here. You have a $200,000 settlement. The major injury is the 2020 claim. That is what is causing the need for treatment. That is what's causing the desire to settle. The way Medicare has set this up is they want to see everything put under the 2016 claim. So in this example, it's a $200,000 settlement. We've had three different injuries that this individual had. The first injury, the 2016 claim, was a med-only claim. However, Medicare wants to see that TPOC on that 2016 claim, and we're going to get to this later. But if there's an MSA on this as well, that should apply there too. This is a single settlement with an individual. However, they are settling multiple dates of injury as part of that. Put everything under that first date of injury. That's where the TPOC goes on that one. And Marty, am I right in saying that the other two claims, the 2018 claim, the 2020 claim, you just terminate ORM?
That's it. Yeah, exactly. So a lot of times what will happen in the past would have been, if I'm looking at this from the carrier's perspective, I probably wouldn't have even reported the 2016 or the 2018 claim, because we're only applying $1 under our one single settlement, right? So we're allocating within the settlement specifically $1 to 2016, $1 2018. Those don't even qualify as settlements under the $750 TPOC rule. Everything goes under the 2020 claim. Now CMS is basically saying, hey, reverse. We don't care about your 2018 or your 2020 settlements. We care about the 2016 claim as your one single TPOC. Doesn't matter what's happening with it. So there are some people who are going to have to make changes for sure in terms of the way that they think about this. There's going to be some changes in terms of the training folks on these claims. But you're exactly right, Lou. The big thing here is, if there was open ORM in any of these claims that were subsequent to that 2016 claim, then that has to be terminated. You will run risk if you're not careful as a reporting responsible reporting entity. You run risk if you leave those claims open by accident, basically. So you want to make sure that you terminate on those claims and then report the TPOC under the first one. This is a change for a lot of organizations. We'll just say that right off the bat. So, and to the extent that your organization has to make technical changes, Scott's going to cover that later on in terms of the time frame for this.
And Marty,
we can
with that,
go ahead.
Yeah, no, sorry. With that, a lot of questions that we get have to do with ICD-10 codes and where to put those codes, particularly if that initial med-only claim had, let's say a laceration to the finger, and then all of the treatment was under the 2020 claim. That is a big question that's coming up. How are companies, entities, responsible reporting entities addressing that?
Yeah, so that's the thing. Now we've got to throw all those big old codes on the 2020 claim onto that 2016 claim when you report it. That's a big change, certainly, obviously, for a lot of organizations, and it's going to result in, when Scott sort of covers the technology piece, there are technical changes potentially, but then there's also just training that's going to have to take place. And CMS, of course, drops it right around the time of Thanksgiving. At this point, when we get to January, it's really hard. You have to wait till January, pretty much, to train people on this new topic. It's a big deal. This is a big deal. We're going to keep coming back to this as the year goes on into early 2026. When we get to the next slide, and we talk about the kind of the role in reverse, right? Multiple settlements involving the same individual. So if there were multiple settlements or multiple TPOCs reported for the same individual for the same incident, but reported by different REs, the records shall reflect each RE's unique TPOC amount and not the aggregate TPOC amount the beneficiary was receiving. So this is basically, if you've got $200,000 spread across 3 separate REs for the same date of incident. So let's pretend like Marty Castavoy's hurt and he gets the $20,000 payment from the landlord, $80,000 payment from the cleaning crew, and then $100,000 payment from the store for his slip and fall, right? Well, and if that's the case, and it's a big $200,000 slip and fall, then each of those companies reports their specific amount as opposed to one aggregate $200,000 report, right? So, or three companies reporting $200,000. So this is a clarification. There are some organizations out there probably who are doing a little bit of both on these things. The only exception to this would be in situations where there was literally joint and several liability, which would really probably take a judgment. Three separate TPOCs reported with each unique TPOC amount. Scott, this one maybe less of a change. Like Lou's one was a real change for a lot of organizations. This one's less of a change, correct?
Correct. Yeah, that's right. This is less of a change and it's easier to implement. Where there are multiple RREs, historically it was if your settlement language specifically states how much money goes, each RRE is responsible for, then the directive, the interpretation was report your amount from the settlement documents. But if nothing is stated in the settlement documents, then you report the full amount. So when there are three RREs, $200,000 total, to CMS, each one's reporting 200,000. CMS sees 600,000 when that's not really the case. So this, I think, is a very welcome change in the guidance here to make sure that RREs are reporting just what they are responsible for.
And one thing I
Absolutely.
want to jump in here with this one for the attorneys on the call and for the adjusters that work with their attorneys on coming up with the settlement language. We can't stress enough, spell this out in the settlement documents. Even though you can do this and you can report this way, we always recommend making sure that the settlement documents are appropriate with how things are apportioned there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, so let's move on to the next slide and just talk a little bit about what we were long looking for, which was some MSA reporting clarity. So for work comp claims, as we know, claims that settled on or after April of last year, or this year, I should say, have to have an MSA report reported, or an MSA amount reported with the TPOC. So what is CMSA? As it relates to multiple dates of incident, an MSA, if applicable, shall be reported under the same guides as above. That is the earliest date of incident if only one TPOC is made. So we go back to that first example, where you've got multiple dates of incident all settling at once. You're going to put the MSA on that first TPOC, even if it was a med-only claim. So Lou, coming back to you here, this is the one that people had a lot of confusion about. Now CMS is coming out with guidance that they can hopefully rely upon going forward. Certainly there was a lot of confusion in the industry. This is sort of hopefully from CMS's perspective eliminating that, correct?
Correct. And I've been working with several clients that are trying to settle multiple claims with single individuals. So that way it's just cleaner on their books as well. But it was a good thing by Medicare that they sort of mirrored the part about the which TPOC to go to with where to put the WCMSA. So in this example here, even though that 2016 claim was a med only, even though that you're applying $1 to it, the MSA amount would go to that 2016 claim, even though all of the treatment is related to that 2020 date of injury. In Medicare's mind, it's the same claimant. You're closing all of them at once. They're going to have some way to track it in their system, relating the 2016, 2018, and 2020 claims back to that individual. At least that's the hope. So with here, everything goes under that first claim. So you're reporting the TPOC amount under that 2016 claim. You're reporting the MSA amount under that 2016 claim. So rather than put it on the major one, you're putting it on that first one.
Perfect. Thanks, Lou. So that kind of concludes our breaking news. The breaking news is a big deal. So you can always go to our blog. You can find our all of the recaps of all this breaking news that we've had and we've outlined here. It's a pretty big series of changes, and we're going to continue to write about this as we hit the new year. As we go on to the next slide, we're going to start the process of, it's not the process, we're going to start our countdown. Top 10 things that we've seen happening in 2025 from a Medicare compliance point of view. And our number one is certainly MSA reporting. And here's where Michael Flower, he's going to kick us off with sort of an overview of what we saw with MSA reporting for this year.
Yeah, thanks, Marty. Obviously, a big year as far as CMS activity, and this was pretty early on. And CMS established a new rule that work comp MSA data had to be reported on all TPOCs that involved a work comp claim, specifically on or after April 4th of 2025. So when we talk about this work comp MSA data, it's good to clarify a few things here because if you're looking at what claims are applicable, it's number one, the person has to be a Medicare beneficiary because that triggers the reporting requirement in a lot of cases. Next is this has to be a work comp claim. So CMS does not require this data to be reported when it comes to liability or no fault claims. So only work comp is impacted by this. The third is there has to be a TPOC on the claim. So in most cases, we're talking about a settlement. But there are other situations where you wouldn't report a TPOC and therefore wouldn't report a work comp MSA. So if you have, say, an indemnity-only settlement, those don't get reported as TPOC. TPOCs are only settlements that involve some type of medical treatment aspect that's being closed out, whether it's past or future. So again, as long as you have a Medicare beneficiary, work comp claim, and a TPOC, this is triggered. And there are 7 things that you can report. 5 of them are mandatory. So the mandatory fields that CMS has here is they want to know what is the total amount of that work comp MSA that was funded, if there was any funding at all. They also want to know the whether it was or what is the life expectancy or how many years is that MSA expected to cover. They want to know if it is a lump sum or if there's an annuity type situation. If there is an annuity, they want to know what is the initial deposit or that seed money and then the annual replenishment. So those are the 5 mandatory fields, and if there is no MSA in your situation or you have a $0 MSA, it is okay to enter zeros or a valid entry showing that there was nothing allocated for it. There are 2 optional fields as well. They include the WCRC case control number if you did the CMS submission process, and then the professional administrator's EIN is also an optional field as well. Just important things to note with this reporting. You have to report this information in any situation where you have that work comp claim involving a TPOC. So that includes if you submitted to CMS, even though you went through the CMS submission process and they have your information on the WCRC side, you still have to report the work comp MSA data in the Section 111 reporting as well. Also, if you did not submit to CMS or you did some type of non-submit allocation for future medical, you still have to report this information as CMS now wants that visibility into how did you account for Medicare's interest with your settlement with that TPOC. Finally, if you did nothing to account for future medical, so $0, which is appropriate in many cases because this doesn't just include situations where you are closing out future medical. You could have a TPOC that involves to-date medical, maybe some conditions, but not all conditions. And as we all know, if you're not closing out all future medical, there's not typically a situation where an MSA is appropriate. So you might have TPOCs where you would never get an MSA in that situation, but you still have to report this information to CMS that you didn't actually fund an MSA for that settlement. So if you take away anything from this specific slide, it's just with that work comp MSA data, if they are a Medicare beneficiary in a work comp claim with a TPOC, you have to be reporting this data to CMS. Otherwise, you're going to get errors in your Section 111 reporting. One of the other new changes is the $0 allocations, and I'm going to turn that over to Neha to talk about that.
Thanks, Michael. Yeah, so going off of what Michael just said, again, if you have a $0 MSA, you have a work comp any, you're still going to report that 0. But another policy change which occurred this year regarding $0 MSAs, that being that effective July 17th of this year, CMS halted review of MSA proposals with a $0 allocation. So it's important to note that while CMS no longer will review $0 MSAs, the parties are still required to ensure that Medicare's interests are adequately protected, right? So as such, CMS has issued guidance, which is fully outlined within the Work Comp Reference Guide, Work Comp MSA Reference Guide, which lists circumstances under which a $0 MSA would be appropriate. So those 4 parameters are briefly noted here. We have the first one in regards to medical zeros, where there's no future treatment needed, where you have determination on the merits, where it's a fully denied claim with no payments, or where you have a denial based off, an investigation that occurred during a particularly statutory period, or known as PWAPs, or payment without prejudice period. So as CMS transitions away from reviewing $0 MSAs, the burden of proof for compliance rests entirely on the parties involved. So it's important to maintain documentation to verify that and to minimize your risk. So as always, if you have a denied claim where you're questioning whether it qualifies under any of these parameters, don't hesitate to shoot it over to us. We can review the claim to determine whether a 0 is appropriate. Now, $0 allocations are not the only type of MSA where we've seen a halt on CMS review. So Patty's going to take us through what's happening in these situations.
Thanks, Neha. So in the latter half of 2025, we began to see that CMS was halting the review of certain submitted MSAs. And it's important to note that we were not given notice of that they were stopping the review. We had our submissions team checking on MSA submissions. Maybe they were in development, so they were checking on the progress, and they happened to notice that the review of the MSA was closed, and we hadn't received a determination letter yet. Well, we started looking at those claims, and we realized that the TPOC had been reported on those claims. So prior to getting the determination letter, the TPOC was reported. So when ECS brought this to CMS's attention, they acknowledged, yeah, they were having that issue, but they offered no resolution. And more importantly, they could not restart those halted reviews. Well, of course, that created problems for those parties that had those halted MSA reviews, and they had to settle without approval because CMS could not undo what they had done. So I guess the important thing, what to do, or maybe what not to do, is if you submit an MSA at this point, since we don't have resolution of this issue, do not report your TPOC until you receive the determination letter. Remember, you have a year to report the TPOC from the date of the settlement, so there's no rush to do so. Make sure before you report the TPOC, you have the determination letter in hand if you submitted an MSA. Scott, what other clarifications do you have in terms of the TPOC?
Thanks, Patty. As Marty, Lou, and I had mentioned in the breaking news section a few minutes ago, we have new TPOC guidance in situations where there are multiple dates of incident being resolved in one settlement, and also where there are multiple RREs involved in a settlement for one individual. I'm not going to rehash those details here. You could rewind the recording and go listen to that breaking news section if you'd like, if you missed anything. But what are the implications to you in the industry? I think everyone understands that these changes were a result from all the hullabaloo of the implementation of the WCMSA fields back in April of this year, right? Confusion around which claims should get the WCMSA data when there are multiple injuries settled in one shot, for example. But as we know from experience, when one thing changes, it could very well lead to other issues down the road. So how might this impact recovery efforts, 3, 6, 9 months from here? We don't know. But it's quite possible that there could be differences in collecting recovery efforts. As for the timing, there's no definitive start date referenced in the policy, in the user guide. So CMS is assuming the industry will start following the new policy now. However, we know that these policy changes may require system modifications. Many have locked down their claim systems to ensure that certain boxes are checked, processes are completed before payment can be issued on a claim. So if you've got certain things and certain checks and balances in place, you very well may need to make some system modifications. historically, CMS has granted a 6-month grace period when things like this, when system changes are needed. So probably safe to say, make the changes as you can, get them in place. CMS also is assuming people are going to start making these policy changes in how you're reporting the claims, here relatively quickly. I'll now pass it over to Neha to learn more about how the 43-day government shutdown impacted all things Medicare.
Thanks, Scott. Yeah, so, if we go back just 2.5 months now, on October 1st was the start of what we all are very well aware of was the government shutdown. On that same day, CMS was slated to host a national webinar on the topic of mandatory work comp MSA reporting. But instead, we were supplied with a government shutdown, to which CMS pulled the plug on that day's informational session and distributed a memo indicating the session would be postponed until further notice. But there's been radio silence as to whether this session, when the session will occur or if it will occur. But while we continue to wait on that, there remain a fair number of MSAs where CMS review has been halted due to the programming changes made by CMS as a result of the collection of MSA reporting data, which is the limbo stage that Patty walked us through earlier. So one area where CMS has provided some clarity, which Lou and Marty thoroughly explained to us earlier, was in the form of the updated NGHP user guide. So, for RREs that were questioning how to report an MSA where, you have one settlement involving multiple dates of injury, for example, CMS has indicated they should report the MSA amount with the earliest date of loss. So despite the government shutdown, the silver lining during this, 43-day period, as Scott pointed out, was that we really didn't feel any significant delay in overall MSA review process or in conditional payment matters that were conducted via the portal. So moving on to number 6 on our top 10 list, Lou is going to walk us through what CMS's year-end data is telling us about MSAs.
Thanks, Neha. And yeah, Medicare wanted to remind the industry that while everyone's focused on civil money penalties and updating their Section 111 platforms, CMS submissions are still here. So they released their benchmark report for 2025, which examines the tendencies over the past 5 years for WCMSA submissions. Now, what we saw, so we analyzed the data, and what we saw was there was an increase in the average settlement amount. However, there was a slight decline in the number of submissions that went over to Medicare from 2024 to 2025. And that's a 3-year trend of that decreasing submission. So while Medicare and getting that CMS submission is still a major part of claims offering and something that any number of companies would be delighted to have, that number continues to drop. And there are a number of factors that could be. For one, it could be that Medicare is no longer reviewing zero allocations, like Neha and Patty talked about before, but it could have to do with other companies changing their protocols with how they want to see that. So the number of MSAs have dropped. The average MSA amount has increased. We have seen that over the last year, as well as the variance between the treatment that Medicare is looking at. So while Medicare and what the industry is submitting as what they see as needed for a Medicare set aside, Medicare continues to add money to it. So on average, it is higher than approximately 16,500 and change, higher than the proposed Medicare set aside amount, which is a 24% increase in the amount of the approved MSA over what Medicare says that they're owed. And this is up 3% over the previous year. So what that means in plain English is that Medicare is continuing to ask for more and more money, and this is the highest that we've seen in the past 5 years. The good news is prescription drugs and the portion of the MSA that medication represents continues a years-long decline, meaning that Medicare is now focusing on the treatment in an MSA as opposed to the prescription medication. However, RX continues to be a major part of the medical spend and a major part of the MSAs. However, we've seen a lot more money put towards treatment in these MSAs than prescription medication. The bottom line is the industry is remaining consistent. We are following the guidelines as an industry. We are following the guidelines that are put to us in order to provide the most accurate and defensible MSA possible. Medicare continues to add money to it, and it underscores just the importance of keeping up with whatever medical trends that are out there. One thing I will say just to wrap up here is our numbers. And if you're interested, if you use us on a consistent basis and you're interested in your numbers, our numbers do beat the industry averages. And since our numbers are in the benchmark findings, it's a chance to say that our numbers are even better than what this represents. So yeah, let's go over to that next slide. Let's talk about some of the new service offerings, Marty, that are out there, that ways that you can help compliance. And I think, Marty, the biggest thing that we've done in 2025 is address the WCMSA amount for Medicare beneficiaries that settle under 25,000. So with that future medical allocation, what are you seeing with that?
Yeah, Lou, I mean, for sure, we know that a lot of people looked prior to, April of this year and said, hey, if I'm settling my case for $24.99, then I don't have to do anything. And certainly the message that we've delivered and has really been delivered consistently by CMS over the last, several years is you can't do nothing. Doing nothing won't work. But so certainly the future medical allocation is something that allows people to settle with confidence. It provides them an independent report that is far less expensive and far shorter than a typical Medicare set-aside that outlines future medical costs, future medical estimates for those cases that are settling from, $750 all the way up to $24,999. We've seen some success with it for sure. It's been very helpful for people to try to put a number on it, and it also helps them to provide that documentation for the judge, documentation for the beneficiary, and then certainly documentation that goes into the settlement. Certainly something that we've seen, some traction with, and obviously, we're about 8 months into this program now, so every little bit we're seeing a little bit, every month we're seeing a little bit more for sure. And I know that, when you talk about the next one, indemnification of zero allocations, this sort of goes hand in hand with that. Lou, and this is something that we're really excited to be able to announce just this month. In fact, I know a lot of people on the line probably don't even know what we're talking about. So certainly when we've looked at over the last 4 or 5 months as CMS has discontinued the review of zeros, the one thing that people have wanted is to retain some level of finality. So I wanted to just sort of like throw it back over to you and say, as an attorney who's settled cases, especially in Mass where they're always zero, typically if you do an MSA, it's always going to be $0 in Mass. What are some of the reasons why somebody might want to get that indemnified zero as opposed to just sort of whistling past the graveyard and hoping?
Yeah, all we could do is advise on what Medicare gives us. And Medicare has as Neha talked about expertly earlier, Medicare will allow the parties to set aside no money in certain situations. However, even though Medicare has put that guidance out there and that case may meet that criteria, so you're able to write either a medical zero allocation or a legal zero allocation. Some parties are uncomfortable with that and they want an extra level of protection should Medicare come back down the road. So ExamWorks Compliance Solutions has now started to offer indemnification on those zero allocations. If certain criteria are met, we take it on a case-by-case basis. It's an exciting offering because it does give that finality that you would come to expect with that CMS approved letter. Now you can do that with zero allocation. So in light of Medicare no longer reviewing zero allocations, we can give you that finality that you're looking for. And I know that in addition to the future medical allocation, which solves a problem for under $25,000 settlements, and the indemnification on zeros, which solves a problem for cases not being able to be submitted but still looking for finality, people are worried about what's going to come in Q1 of 2026 and beyond. When Medicare releases the results of their audits, when they try to collect on civil money penalties, so ExamWorks is at the forefront of looking at this, and we are armed and ready to help clients with those. So if you get hit with penalties, if you get hit with an audit that could result in penalties and you are notified, Marty, what are some of the ways that ECS can help with that?
Yeah, so definitely, Lou. I mean, we've certainly got a full army of experts when it comes to understanding Section 111 reporting. They all report up through Scott, and Scott's team definitely can help to identify risk for organizations, but then also help you not only identify that risk, but then make the necessary corrections to hopefully prevent you from seeing any penalties. We're really a couple of months into really true risk when it comes to civil money penalties. So certainly it's always an option. And if you ever have a question or concern, don't worry about calling Scott. Scott will get back to you right away with an expert who can help you. So if we go on to that next slide, and speaking of data, we're going to cover a little bit of what CMS is doing with the data. And this is going to go kind of quick, but it's anticipated, and the memo was issued by Medicare in November, as I mentioned earlier, that effective February, Part D plans will have the option to basically deny Medicare, but deny reimbursement of prescription drugs or deny payment of prescription drugs when it's tied back to an MSA and a specific NDC number. And as it says right there in the slide, CMS will permit plans to introduce prior authorization requirements and implement beneficiary level point of sale edits for drugs identified in that enrollee's WCMSA. But obviously, they're going to utilize if they're going to utilize the NDC number. The question is, how are they going to get the NDC number? So, Neha, one thing that we haven't talked too much about at all, which is the fact that NDC numbers really don't come over to these Part D plans through Section 111 reporting. They can only come through the actual the actual submitted MSA itself. So we're not looking at every single case here, are we? It's just only on those only on those cases that are submitted to CMS, where CMS has ultimately reviewed and approved that MSA amount, where they're even gonna potentially have access to this information, which sort of creates their sort of like haves and have-nots, where if you haven't submitted your case to CMS, they're not gonna have access to this information. If you did submit your case to CMS, then they might, right? I mean, the only way they can get the NDC number is through a submission. We're not sending this data through Section 111, right?
Right, exactly. And so, this is now where you get down to, again, submission of the MSA is a voluntary process. And so only those that are then submitted and reviewed would have that, very specific information when it comes to prescription drugs. So you're also talking about the fact that you have a lot of, non-submit MSAs where the MSA amount itself may be reported, but that MSA wasn't submitted. So in looking at that, like you said, you have the haves and the have-nots, of kind of looking very specifically at prescription drug information, which would only be listed out within, an MSA report that was actually reviewed by CMS. So I think right now we can head over into number 9 on our list of the top 10 and talk about some changes that we've seen with amended reviews. Patty, I think you were going to walk us through this one.
Thanks, Neha. Yes, so for everybody on the call, most of you know what amended review is. That's for cases where medicals have changed since you got the determination letter, or maybe you were unable to settle because you got such a big counter hire from CMS on a submitted MSA. So we still have that process, but in April, CMS did remove the requirement to wait a year before you do amended review. In the beginning, when we had amended review, we had a 1 to 6 year wait. Then they dropped it down to a year. Now they've taken that wait away totally. However, you still have to do a revised MSA, and which still must result in a 10% or $10,000 difference, whichever is greater, compared to what CMS came up with in their determination letter. So that hasn't changed at all. Now, one thing we are seeing in 2025, and they did update the reference guide on this, they are requiring all medical records and prescription histories since the original submission date. So what does that mean? That means you cannot just send the records, which evidence there's been a change in the medicals. You have to send those records and all records since the original submission date. If those records are not submitted with the amended review, CMS is declining to review that amended review. And even worse, they're counting that as your one and done shot at amended review. So it's imperative to have all those records submitted with the amended review so that they will take a look at it and you can get that MSA reduced. Michael, can you share some key compliance dates for us?
Sure, and just want to highlight what Patty said with the amended reviews. It's really good to not view that as the same process as the that initial work comp MSA submission, just because CMS is not going to put that on hold. They're just going to either take it or reject it at that point. So, very good point there, Patty. With regard to the October 11, 2025 date we have here, we're talking about civil monetary penalties. Everybody's favorite topic, I'm sure, but it's good to just know that right now we are live as far as claims that could potentially be late and subject to the civil monetary penalties. The applicability date of the civil monetary penalty rule was October 11, 2024. And again, with the civil monetary penalties, we are concerned about the timeliness of these claims being reported. CMS has said we want these claims being reported as far as 1 year from the point of ORM acceptance, or 1 year from that point of TPOC entry. So it's just important that you are reporting these claims timely, and that if you identify that a claim hasn't been reported, that you do so as soon as you're able, just because these penalties get worse and worse the longer that you let them go. This rule, again, is prospective in nature, meaning any claims before October 11, 2024, not going to be subject to civil monetary penalties. Again, it's just if ORM or TPOC occurred on or after October 11th of last year. So going forward, again, even if you have claims that could potentially be late, would still recommend cleaning those up now just to mitigate any potential penalties. But also, as far as what the map forward is, CMS is going to begin auditing claims. I believe they've previously said April of 2026 is when they're going to start looking at these, but they will look back to this October 11, 2025 date. And what they're going to do is they're going to take 250 claims per quarter, and they're going to do that on a pro rata basis between both group health plan and non-group health plan. So you should not be seeing many audits, period, from CMS as far as civil monetary penalties are concerned, just because it's a big field of responsible reporting entities doing their reporting out there. But going forward, have a plan if you do get any civil monetary penalties going forward, just because you don't get a lot of time to respond to them. Once these happen, CMS is going to issue an informal one. You have 30 days to respond to CMS with any mitigating evidence. And then at that point, CMS will make a determination as to whether to reduce or eliminate that civil monetary penalty. But if you do not respond within those first 30 days, you cannot deal with CMS on an informal level. At that point, you're going to have to take it to an administrative law judge hearing, and you're in more formal litigation. So it is just important to have an escalation process so you have the right people looking at these and responding to them as soon as you're able to. All right, I'm going to turn this back over so we can get to discussing what's on tap for 2026.
Perfect. Thanks, Michael and everybody. So Certainly, there's been a lot that's happened this year. It's been one of the more eventful years in Medicare compliance, really over the last 15 years. We're looking forward to a few things. So one thing that's actually not even on the list is, and this is something I think that Neha brought up when we talked about the shutdown, is we have not seen CMS yet schedule the WCMSA reporting webinar. So that was supposed to be October 1st. We're still waiting on that. So that's something that's not on this list, but that we're really looking forward to. When they made that announcement back at the end of the summer, they made that announcement with the expectation that beneficiaries and their attorneys would actually join that webinar. So I'm not sure why there's been a delay, but certainly that's one that we really do want to see, and we want to hear from CMS on that topic. There are a number of issues that have been brought up today that are still unresolved. As an example, those claims that are in limbo claims, certainly we don't want to have to see Santa doing a limbo next year again. So with that being said, we are looking forward to January 15th. That's the date of the CMS CMP webinar. That's coming actually in about 16 days or 30 days, I should say. And then we know that next, right after that, we're going to begin seeing the data exchange with Part D around point of sale denials. Now, the question of whether or not that's going to have major impacts to work comp claims or not is, we still just don't know. It's not work comp claims anymore. Actually, it's work comp settlements. It's people who have work comp Medicare set-asides. I'm sure that those of you who are claims payers in the line, you do not want to have to deal with a situation where the beneficiary is calling you, your former employee, your former work comp claimant is calling you 6 months or a year after a settlement saying, hey, I just got denied coverage at Walgreens for a treatment that was completely unrelated to the claim because of the fact that gabapentin is something that's an NDC number that CMS has. So we're really, really carefully watching that and closely monitoring that situation. Okay, so the next one, third-party recovery agent, EINs are required. When we get to third-party recovery agent EINs, this one, I actually am going to go back to Scott. I didn't really cover this with you before, but right now, as a third-party recovery agent, we're always providing our name and our address. This one is something that, it's required effective April 2026, but I assume that you're pretty much ready to go for this more or less now, since it's just that one extra field, right?
Yeah, that's right. The reason for this, we think, is due to the Go Paperless initiative that CMS launched a few years ago. And ECS, as third-party recovery agent, we like to be paperless, right? Who wants to wait on mail coming in, open the letter, scan it, then make it electronic when we can download it from CMS on day one? So when the third-party recovery agent information is submitted in the TIN reference file in the records when reporting quarterly to CMS, the third-party recovery agent EIN is there because that ties the TPRA to their account in the MSP recovery portal, so that we can do what I just said, log into the recovery portal, download those letters. So yeah, minimal change is needed for that one. We got all that wrapped up already.
Perfect. And then the last up is CMP audits and possible penalties. Certainly, we're watching this very closely. First audits are going to begin next month, and CMS is looking at 1,000 claims per year, 250 claims per quarter, and of those NGHP, we expect about 150 total or 100 total NGHP, somewhere in that range. And then, for work comp, we might be looking at 30 claims total countrywide that are even evaluated, never mind ones that are late. So if you really are late, you just got a lightning strike moment, don't be late. That's our best advice. If you ever are, then you know who to call. You call the Ghostbusters, call Scott Huber and his team. With that being said, we have a few minutes left to get to our questions and answers. We've had a very lively chat box today, and Adriana, I'm going to turn it over to you, see if you can find a couple that haven't already been answered, and then we can close this out.
Great. Thanks, Martin. Thanks, everyone. So the first question I'm going to give over to Neha. What if there is no or ORM on the 2016 claim, do we still have to report that as TPOC?
Sorry about that. I was muted for a second. Yeah, I'm here. I just had to unmute. Yeah, so ORM and TPOC are two separate reporting triggers. So I assume that's kind of what we're talking about here under Section 111. So even if you haven't assumed ORM, you're still going to report TPOC if that is in fact actually TPOC. I know Marty and I have discussed this in previous webinars as well, and I think we discussed this a little bit here. If you're dealing with something that's just indemnity only, that's not a full TPOC. You want to make sure that you have your future medical component as well as your indemnity component, and that you have a total settlement amount. So again, even if you're not assuming ORM, you would want to report TPOC.
Great, thanks, Neha. And I'm going to give you this last one as well, since you've been chatting with Daniel. So Daniel had a follow-up question. What happens if, say, gabapentin is in the MSA due to a right shoulder injury that was settled? The claimant then injures their left wrist after a fall 2 years later, and the doc writes a script for gabapentin for the left wrist injury. Will Part D require them to use the MSA for the unrelated injury simply because it was included in an MSA?
Yeah, so short answer is no, but this is where things, can get sticky. So the MSA funds really should be utilized for the compensable injury and any treatment that's related to the compensable injury. So where you have gabapentin that's now being prescribed twice, right? Once for the right shoulder, which was an accepted, work comp claim, it's included in the MSA, and then you have gabapentin being prescribed again for a fall which occurred 2 years later for a different body part. It wouldn't be appropriate to then utilize the medication that's being taken for the left wrist and to pull that money out of the MSA funds. I understand that can get a little convoluted and a little complicated. This is also why we talk about, professional administration for some of these MSAs sometimes. But yes, there has to be separation here between compensable injuries and those that are included within the MSA and what's being paid out of the MSA funds, and those that are, utilized for unrelated injuries.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the ECS on MSP podcast. We look forward to joining you next month for our next episode. For the latest updates and educational content from ECS, please visit our website at examworkscompliance.com. See you next time.